Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'll be answering questions involving angles of elevation and depression. If you haven't watched my two videos on finding missing side and finding missing angle using trig ratios, I would recommend that you watch those two videos first before you watch this one, because this video is basically problem solving questions using the trig ratios. Now let's look at angles of elevation. Angles of elevation, they're created by looking up at the object. So in this diagram, guys, what happened is that dog, by looking eye level, you would not be able to see that bird in the tree. So in order for that dog to be able to see that bird, it therefore means that he has to look up. By looking up, guys, an angle of elevation is formed between his line of sight and the horizontal. So you can see the angle here is formed between his line of sight, meaning he's looking up, as well as the horizontal, which means that if he was just looking straight across. Now let's look at angles of depression. Angles of depression are created by looking down at an object. They're alternate to angles of elevation and therefore the same size. So in this diagram, again, like the one that we looked at previously, now if we're looking at the bird and the bird wants to see that dog, it therefore means that if that bird look eye level, that bird would not be able to see the dog. So it therefore means that in order to see the dog, the bird needs to look down. By looking down, an angle of depression is basically formed between the eye level and the bird's line of sight. So, as I mentioned earlier, that angles of elevation and angles of depression, they're alternate angles, which means that they're equal. And just to remind you that alternate angles, another way to remember about them is that they're basically Z angles. So again, that's basically my horizontal, meaning eye level. Looking at that bird now, in order for me to see that bird, it therefore means that I need to look up. And by looking up, an angle of elevation is formed. And then I need to see that centipede. So in order to see it, I need to look down, which therefore means an angle of depression is formed. So let's look at the steps, guys, in answering questions that involves angles of elevation and depression. The first step, once you're given these types of questions, I recommend that you draw a diagram. The second step is to label your sides. The third step is basically to identify the correct trig ratio that you'd be using, and that would either be your sine, your cos, or your tan. The next step now, guys, is basically to put info from the question into the ratio that you're using. And then finally, you'd basically use a scientific calculator to evaluate your final answer. Now let's look at an example. It says, Betty is lying in a hammock and sees a butterfly up in the air. The angle of elevation is 30 degrees and the horizontal distance is 20 meters. How far away is the butterfly? The first step, guys, as I mentioned before, is to draw your diagram. So that's my diagram there, because I have Betty would be here, just the point is fine. And then basically would assume that the butterfly would have been up in the air, so we would put that above Betty. And now basically, guys, think about it this way. We have this horizontal line which represents if Betty was just looking straight across, she would not be able to see that butterfly, which therefore means that she has to look up. By looking up, an angle is formed between her line of sight and the horizontal. And in the question, it gives you that it's an angle of elevation and it should have been 30 degrees. Okay, so the next step now, guys, is basically to put that 30 degrees in. Also, the question tells you that the horizontal distance is 20 meters, which therefore means that I can put that 20 meter there as well. And then it says, how far away is the butterfly, which therefore means I need this distance, guys. I need the distance from Betty to the butterfly. And looking at this triangle, which is a right angle triangle, it therefore means that that now represents our hypotenuse. So if I label my sides, guys, I would basically have that 20 meter representing my adjacent, and that question mark that I put there would have been my hypotenuse. Which trig ratio are we using given that we're dealing with adjacent and hypotenuse? Therefore means yes, we're using cos. So we first write our rule. We always write our rule, that way we won't forget it. So we have cos theta is equal to adjacent over hypotenuse. Our next step now, guys, is to substitute all the values that we know. So cos theta would be cos 30 degrees, because I replaced theta with the angle that I know to be 30 degrees, equals to 20, which represents my adjacent, over my hypotenuse, which I don't know. Next step is to multiply both sides of the equation by my h, which is in my denominator, because I really don't need that variable in my denominator. When I do that, I get h cos 30 degrees equals to 20. Again, I'm trying to solve for h, so it therefore means that that cos 30 degrees, I need to get rid of it. How do I go about doing that? Think about it this way. H is being multiplied by cos 30, so I need to do the inverse operation, which therefore means that I need to divide both sides of the equation by cos 30 degrees. And when I do that, I basically get h is equal to 20 over cos 30 degrees, or 20 divided by cos 30 degrees. All you need to do now is to input that in your calculator. You should get an answer of 23.1 meter rounded to 1 decimal place. So this question involves angle of elevation. Now let's look at a question involving angle of depression. Bob is at the top of a vertical cliff 90 meters high. He sees a boat out at sea. The angle of depression from Bob to the boat is 38 degrees. How far from the cliff base is the boat? Again, guys, remember our first step is to draw a diagram to represent the information that we're given. So that's my sketch there. My next step now, guys, is basically to label my diagram based on the information that I'm given in the question. So I label basically my vertical cliff as 90 meters high because I'm given that information in the question. My next step now, guys, is to draw my angle of depression there. If I should look straight across eye level, I would not be able to see the boat, so it therefore means that that's the reason why Bob needs to look down, and by looking down, an angle of depression is formed between his line of sight and basically the horizontal. So that's 38 degrees there. That's 38. So the next thing now, guys, that we need to note is that this vertical distance here would have been exactly the same as this one here. So let's complete our right angle triangle. So now we're given an angle. We're also given that height there to be 90 meters, and basically we're trying to find how far from the cliff base is the boat, which therefore means that we need this horizontal distance. Okay, so given that we need this horizontal distance, we label it x. It doesn't matter what variable you use. Now we need to figure out which trig ratio we're using. Again, this x would have been my adjacent side, guys, and then this 90 meter would have been directly opposite to my angle, so that's my opposite side. So if we're dealing with adjacent and opposite, it therefore means that we're using tan. So I write my ratio. So tan theta is equal to opposite over adjacent. I substitute the values I know, which would have been tan 38 degrees, again that 38 represents my angle, equals to 90, which represents my opposite side, over my adjacent, which I don't know, so I write it as x. My next step now, guys, is to multiply both sides of the equation by x, because I need to solve for x, so I need to first get rid of that x out of the denominator. When I do that, I get x tan 38 degrees equal to 90. Again, trying to solve for x, I need to get rid of that tan 38 degrees. So I divide both sides by tan 38 degrees. Now I get x is equal to 90 divided by tan 38 degrees. All I need to do now is basically to input that in my calculator, and I should get an answer of 115.2 meters, correct to 1 decimal place. So again, guys, angles of elevation and depression are just problem solving questions that you can use your trig ratios to help you solve. Alright, so again, thanks for watching my video. Please, if you haven't subscribed yet, do so. And if you have, please click that notification bell so that you're notified when I post new videos. Don't forget to like and share this video. Thanks for watching, guys.